Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the issue of VTC technologies and the use of that, so that those who are seeking to have their characterization changed have that opportunity to make the personal story. And I'd sort of like to extend it to the BCMRs, where they are not. That is not the case, where you're looking, where the right to make that statement personally doesn't exist, and so the issue of the VTC is sort of a follow-on issue. And I know that the Human Rights Watch has really been carefully considering the ways in which these decisions are being made, and I think a former staff member on one of the boards made the point to the Human Rights Watch, the importance of a personal appearance at the DRB as being, quote, huge, and possibly, quote, the difference between getting an upgrade or not. So in that context, last September, there is here a military sexual assault prevention caucus, and we hosted our second briefing on male military sexual assault. And at that briefing, we heard from Heath Phillips, a former sailor who was repeatedly raped and retaliated against by fellow sailors and his chain of command as well. Phillips eventually left his ship saying, quote, "I couldn't take it no more," unquote. Phillips said, quote, "I was not going to go out to sea with these men and deal with this every single day," unquote. So he agreed to an other than honorable discharge rather than facing a court-martial for going AWOL. And he said, quote, "After being subjected to countless sexual assaults, beatings, threats, humiliation, in constant fear, a total basket case, I would have signed a deal with the devil himself to escape the torture I kept getting while on board the ship," unquote. And while the VA has found that he has PTSD that's 100% service-connected, he's still fighting after 20 years to get his discharge characterization upgraded. So he's told my staff, quote, that "my strong belief is if I'm allowed a personal hearing and look them in the eyes and they could hear about my life and what I went through, the decision would not be denied." So again, in the context of the BCMRs, I'd just like to hear your thoughts on the feasibility of rethinking, of affording petitioners who requested an opportunity to appear, and as you're considering the use of video technology, whether or not that might be permitted in, that more narrow version might be permitted in the BCMR context. And we'll start here with you.
So, ma'am, as I had indicated, we do, within our discharge review boards, have the VTC capability. And so a situation as you had described, that would be certainly one that we would have had the traveling panels with the VTC equipment.
So even though it's in the BCMR context,
or
as
BCMR.
Opposed to the...
So with the personal appearance, typically we only do about 2 or 3 per year. With the Army, we're looking at a magnitude about 14,000 cases that we adjudicate, with a record review. And so those individuals that do feel that their stories are compelling, there is an opportunity to do a personal appearance.
And how do you make that decision? Since it's not a right, it's a discretionary decision on your part.
We essentially look at the records itself to say, is there insufficient evidence within the material that the applicant has provided? If we think there's information that is not there, that is lacking, and there's an opportunity to bring them in to get additional information, that would be one of the opportunities that we would look at to actually, bring them in to say that we just don't have sufficient evidence with the records review.
So this gentleman was obviously served in the Navy, and the Navy has a different approach. I welcome your thoughts.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. That's a tragic case, and I'm sorry to hear the suffering that he's going through. The problem with having the personal appearances at the Board for Correction and Naval Records is really one of resources and the magnitude of the number of cases that we deal with there. We actually haven't given consideration to perhaps having some type of a set aside for discharge review cases, because that's a smaller portion of our overall work requirement there. So that's something that we certainly could look at. But typically what happens when a person petitions and requests a personal hearing, they are asked what the purpose of that personal hearing is. What do they want to accomplish with that personal hearing? And in the few cases that I've seen where those have been requested, they really don't articulate the type of rationale that you just described. I think that rationale that he just gave would probably be compelling if it was articulated to the board. But as far as I know, I've not seen that type of an argument made to garner a personal hearing. And as I said, the magnitude of the caseload that we have at the board and the resources that we have, if we added personal hearings, a considerable number of them anyway, it would really stall things out considerably, and we're already pretty much at maximum capacity. So I think that would be problematic, but we'd certainly be interested in considering it.
Well, we'll certainly go back and revisit this with this gentleman who, as I said, has come to speak before the Military Sexual Assault Prevention Caucus and follow on. But I do think, I can't imagine that he's alone in his story, and I do think even though it might be costly, we're talking about something that has a real impact on people's lives. I have one more question, if I could. Between 2000 and 2009, government reports reveal that thousands of service members were discharged improperly for a, quote, personality disorder, unquote, many of whom were rape victims. Though their discharges were usually honorable, the narrative reason for discharge on their discharge paper, DD 214, unfairly labels them as having a, quote, personality disorder, unquote. This is deeply stigmatizing and may prevent them from getting jobs or benefits. Brian Lewis, a survivor of male sexual assault who also has briefed the Military Sexual Assault Prevention Caucus, as well as testifying in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, has said that as a result of his personality disorder diagnosis, he carries his, quote, discharge as an official and permanent symbol of shame on top of the trauma of the physical attack, the retaliation, and its aftermath, unquote. For veterans whose doctors confirm that they do not have a personality disorder, what prevents your offices from changing the narrative reason for discharge to the neutral, quote, secretarial authority, unquote, as was done after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell for those who were discharged for their sexual orientation? And I'll start to the right here, since I kind of short-circuited you in the previous round.
So could you repeat the last part of the question, ma'am?
So, you know, for veterans whose doctors have confirmed that they do not have a personality disorder, what prevents your offices from changing the narrative reason for discharge to the more neutral, quote, secretarial authority, unquote, which was done after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell for those who'd been discharged for their sexual orientation?
Nothing prevents us, and we have, our Board of Correction and Military Records has considered exactly the type of cases that you're talking about, and we have changed the narrative or the reason for discharge on the 214s. So we do that on Don't Ask, Don't Tell on a regular basis. We have done it on sexual assault, sexual trauma cases as well. So we do address that.
Do you have some sense of what the metrics are? How is it routine, automatic, or is it a complicated process?
So it's not a complicated process. Is it routine? We have a presumption, or we regularly consider the facts of the case, and then we make an assessment. And we go back and forth with the applicant as well. When they submit the case, we evaluate it, and then we provide our analysis back to the applicant to see if they have anything additional they want to add, because we try very hard to be transparent and fair. Then they get a chance to respond, and then there can be this back and forth a couple of times so that they have the opportunity to submit additional information to prove the case. But what I've found in reading the opinions of our board members is they are very generous, and they attempt to go out of their way to find a solution that is the right solution for the applicant. I've only been in the job since about December, so I'm the new person on the table. But what I've seen is our members are very honorable, and they're very considerate, and they really, really try to do the right thing.
That's good to hear. Mr. Woods?
Yes, ma'am. I think based on the factual pattern that you presented, I would find it to be highly unlikely that we wouldn't change not characterization necessarily, but the reason for discharge to secretarial determination. If the person presents medical evidence that refutes the original diagnostic, or even it might not have been a diagnostic, it may have just been simply an administrative determination of a personality disorder without a medical determination. That's entirely possible, especially back in the Vietnam era and later, before our more recent times when we've become a little bit more aware of these kinds of situations. So we certainly have the capability of doing it, and especially if there's refuting medical evidence. And in all of these cases, we do have them reviewed by a medical practitioner to try to determine whether or not there's evidence that would suggest that, in fact, there may have been a personality disorder situation. But that's not a change that we would be particularly reluctant to make, quite frankly.
Do you have any sense of the numbers of the Air Force?
I'm sorry I don't, but I'm happy to get those.
Actually, I'd ask a question I'd like to ask that, if you could get back to me.
I'll take that for the record. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
And ma'am, I would say very much like the Air Force and the Navy, the Army as well, as long as we have the appropriate documentation, we routinely change the narrative to reflect Secretariat authority.
Thank you all. Appreciate your testimony.